a couple of weeks ago, Carl and I, we took a look at the beginning of the banking crisis that was emerging, and since then, one of the major Swiss banks has failed. Credit Suisse has gone. That's been bundled into UBS. But the economy is still here, so we've got to ask the question, is everything fine now? Do we need to stop worrying and just get on with life? So, I mean, on the other side of that, we've got Deutsche Bank, rumblings about that, about to fall into the sea. Their shares are down about 15%. Lots of other conversations going. So the question that's being asked all over financial Twitter, I read it so you don't have to, is that, is this canaries in the coal mine, or is this something else? Are we just making a big fuss over nothing? Now, before I get into that, it is worth pointing out, as we have recently been demonetized, I do urge all of you who are watching on YouTube, why don't you just come over to lotuseaters.com? You can watch the whole podcast there. You get the uncensored version, you get the fuller version, you get the banter before and after, and you don't have to pay anything if you watch it on the website. But you could, if you like, pay an extra £5, and then you get access to all the premium content, such as we've got a series on history from Bo, which is covering the Sumerians in this episode, but there are plenty of others, loads of content on there, so check it out. Right, so back to the financial drama that is rumbling along in the background. So this is a big debate that the finance people are having at the moment. Is it canaries in a coal mine, or is there something? Is it fine, or do we not need to worry? Now, the arguments against this is, that Credit Suisse and Silicon Valley Bank, they were bad banks, and therefore you don't need to worry. So this is the equivalent of people in the coal mine saying, yep, two of the canaries have dropped dead, but they were probably the illest ones, and therefore we don't need to worry. We can get on with this. Well, we've got an interesting study that's come out. So let's have a quick look at this. This is a study that's recently been put out from a bunch of fairly sensible universities. I don't know what Southern California's like, or I hear Northwestern's got a good reputation, Columbia and Stanford. Now, they've been looking at these 4,000 banks in the US, and there is an essential problem that you've got in the US at the moment with their financial system, and that is their banking system has been forced by regulators into holding US treasuries, which is US debt, and it's been forced into holding these mortgage-backed securities because these are supposed to be some of the safest stuff that they've got. And we know that they're sitting on losses collectively of about 620 billion, which is quite a bit of money. And we know that of the total assets that the US banking sector holds, about 18 trillion, half of that is nominally uninsured, although there's only enough insurance to cover a tiny, tiny fraction of that amount. And the big thing, which is what this segment's really going to be about, is about the incoming property value crisis that they're going to be facing. And that's going to be increasingly relevant as we get into this. So this study, they looked at these 4,000 banks and they ran the numbers, which is a bit difficult to do because these numbers aren't put out quite as clearly as they could be. And they came to the conclusion that the average bank is sitting on a loss of about 10%. And 1 in 20 banks are sitting on a loss of 20%. Now, you might think, well, what does that mean to me? Why is that relevant in the slightest, these notional losses that they've got on their balance sheet? Well, what it means is if there was an honest accounting and you tried to get your money out of the bank, for every dollar you had in there, you'd only get 90 cents out in the average bank. So it does matter to you. And if you're in one of the 1 in 20 banks, you'd only get 80 cents out for every dollar that you had in there. So it does matter. It is worth looking at how well capitalized these are. And the essential difference is that because of the economic problems the US has been having, because it's got so massively into debt over the last 50 years, is that the last time a aspect of this started to blow up, they started to ramp up interest rates. Which has left banks in the fundamental problem that they can no longer make money. The reason that the banks normally make money is something called the yield curve, which, I'll explain it nice and simply. It is simply to say the yield curve should look like that. It should be that short-term money is reasonably cheap, because if I'm going to lend you money for a short period of time, I probably don't want much return on it. If I'm going to lend you money for a long amount of time, I want more return on it. So that's how banks make their money, is people put their money into the banks, right? And if it's in there like a deposit, you can take it out the next day. So the idea should be that you get a relatively small return on short-term deposits. And then banks make their money by lending their money out long-term, like mortgages and business loans, that kind of stuff. And that has a higher rate on it. And so the banks simply make money because they have short-term deposits at a low rate, and they make money by doing long-term loans at a higher rate. Banks make money, right? And because of that, you don't have to pay for your bank account. You get free banking. and you get all of the other services that come along with it. And you even started to get to the situation where you started getting perks with your bank account. You get free cinema tickets or some guff like that, or whatever it is, services they decided to.
I've been missing out. I've never got anything from them.
Oh really? Oh okay.
Yeah.
Well, you have at least got free banking from them.
I got 0% interest. So I don't feel like it's even worth it. But yeah.
Yeah. But you're not paying for the bank as a service like you do Netflix or something like that.
So but they're making money off my money. So.
Well, they used to be. That was the idea. But this yield curve thing, it's got a bit inverted. So now short-term money is more expensive than long-term money. So banks are basically they would go out of business if they reflected this honestly. So the problem is that they're having to artificially lower the rates. So you do get 0% rates in your bank. But what people have been realizing is because these interest rates have shot up, you can take your money out of the bank. I appreciate you're a Zoomer, and therefore having masses of money in the bank probably isn't a huge concern. But let's say you were a boomer, let's say you're your grandparents' age. In that case, well, a lot of these people do have lots of money sitting around in the bank, and they're starting to realise that they can take it out of their bank and they can put it in a money market fund and get 5%. So money is draining out of the banking sector and going into money market funds where they can get 5% instead of 0%. And this sort of, the tide is coming down, and we're starting to see the situation that these banks are in. So all of this money is starting to flow out, and it causes a bit of a problem, because what this study does is it looks at it and says, okay, what would happen if a bank run were to start to occur where people start to take their money out? So what if half of the people who had their money in these banks decided to leave and to follow that, which is a process which is increasingly happening. Now, what they found is that if just 10% of people did this, then 66 banks in the US would fail. So this is a lot bigger problem than just Silicon Valley Bank and Credit Suisse in Switzerland. And then they looked at, okay, what would happen if 30% of people took their money out of the banks? Well, then 106 banks would fail. So I guess my point here is that the banks are at significantly greater risk than you are being told by the sort of regular mainstream media sources on this one. But what's most concerning is that the 10 banks in the biggest trouble, they're rather large. They're some of the biggest ones. In fact, all of the 10 at most risk banks have assets over 50 billion, and actually one of them has assets over $1 trillion. So it's one of the largest banks. Now, there are only 6 banks with assets over $1 trillion. They're JP Morgan, Bank of America, Citi, Wells, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley. And we know that one of them is potentially in trouble. So the question then becomes, well, how can you work out which of these is potentially the bank in trouble? Well, I mean, it's very difficult to know because they obfuscate this data as much as they can. But what I would note is, here's an interesting tweet. So CNBC, which is the main sort of financial news channel in the US, has suddenly decided to delist credit default swap information for 5 banks, including JP Morgan and Bank of America. So somebody's leaning on them. This is a crisis which is rumbling along in the background, and everybody is trying to make sure that you don't find out about it quite as much as you should. Now, what is the bigger problem here? What is the bit that I sort of hinted that's not being talked about at the moment? Well, it is starting to get talked about, and I'll let Raoul Pal explain what that problem is.
The reason they have to undertake QE is the banks, particularly these regional banks, smaller and medium-sized banks, have another big issue on their balance sheet, and that is they are the largest lenders to the commercial real estate market. Now, if we go back to when we first spoke at the beginning of the pandemic, at that point, we were all going to the office. I was in New York when I saw you because I was going to the office, and we had 60 odd people in our office at Real Vision. Now we've got 3 people in our office. We've downsized once, and we still only have 3 people in the office, and we can't get out of our damn lease. And everybody's got the same issue. Nobody's going back to the office. The world has changed. We can all work remotely. So we used to do interviews like this in person. Now we do them over Zoom. So then we've got massive amounts of commercial real estate that are basically empty. And the numbers are a bit weird because you also need to realize that empty office space that's registered is entirely empty. But actually, most people are trapped into leases where they've got 10% of their workforce going in. So as soon as those leases come up, people are going to tip those out too. So we've got a second bomb to hit these smaller banks, and that is this real estate market. And the real estate market is going to be illiquid, and chances are it's not going to get solved. I mean, I spoke to one of the biggest managers of commercial real estate for one of the biggest pension funds in the United States, and he's like, they're going to bulldoze over this stuff in the end.
Right. So he's explaining there why commercial real estate is in such trouble. And the reason they're going to have to bulldoze a lot of this stuff is because even though you can convert some of it into residential, actually it's really difficult with a lot of this commercial stuff because there's a lot of regulations. Also, there's plumbing issues and there's like 1,001 other reasons
How
why.
much do you actually need, etc.
Yeah. So it is very difficult to convert a lot of this stuff over. So that's why so much property he thinks in the sort of Western world, as particularly in the US, is going to get bulldozed over the next couple of years. So this is a real time bomb that is ticking away in the background. Let's have a look at this tweet from I can't pronounce that, Kobasai letter. They're pointing out that over the next 5 years, you've got a huge amount of debt secured on property. They're talking about 2.5 trillion there, which is going to mature. Now, when that debt matures, it's going to need to get rolled over because presumably whoever bought this property hasn't been, saving up on the side to buy it outright. I mean, we are in a debt-fueled economy, so this vast amount of money, and this is the largest amount of money that's ever been sort of rolled over on this debt basis in any 5-year period in history, as they're saying here. A vast amount of this debt is going to need to get rolled over. And the last time they took out these loans, they were probably doing it like 0% or 1%, something like that, some tiny percentage. Now they're going to be doing it like 5%. And so the interest charges that they're going to be facing are going to be absolutely crippling. And on top of that, the stuff that it's secured on is only sort of occupied officially at sort of 60 or 70%. And as Rao was pointing out, actually a lot of it is that's going to go significantly lower when people get to the end of their leases, as a lot of people convert over to work from home and other sort of arrangements that you can do these days. So this is I think is going to be a substantial problem for Western economies, US economy coming up. So have a think about whether you want to secure some of your net worth in things that are out of the banking system like gold or Bitcoin. You can take your choice on that. But you might think, okay, well, that's just that's somebody else's problem. That's rich people's problem, or that's the US's problem or something, and therefore I don't need to worry about. So just in case you are our core audience in the UK, let's bring it back to you to try and worry you as well. So let's go to this next link, which is looking. This is a problem that not a lot of people are talking about. So I had to find some fairly obscure publication to pick up on this. But one of the things I'm aware of is councils. They own a lot of property. And the reason being is because, they noticed about sort of 10 years ago that they could borrow money from central government for basically the same cost as government, so basically nothing. And then what they could do is they could go out and buy offices and they could earn, a 3 or 4% yield on that. So they had basically an unlimited amount of money that they could borrow at 0%, turn it into property, generating 3 or 4%, and that would take care of their budget problem because the money that councils were getting from central government was going down. And so they had to have the choice to do this or stick your taxes up. Well, their property portfolios are going to be potentially in significant trouble soon, because if they've put it into, say, office property, and then the value of that property, well, first of all, the loans on those are going to have to be refinanced whenever they come up at significantly higher rates. And also those properties themselves, if some of them start having to get bulldozed, the value of those will fall significantly. So where's that going to land? That's going to land back on council taxpayers, which isn't going to be too much fun. Let's scroll down a bit on this one, because there is there's a table there that shows some of the councils that are in the biggest trouble on this. So reading from this website, one of the biggest concerns is the scale of debt accrued to the 4 smallest local authorities in England. 4 the smallest, not smallest, including Spelthorne Council in Surrey, which says it is heavily reliant on investment income for the services it provides. Spelthorne so far has borrowed 1 billion, despite having an annual budget of just 22 million. So the debts that it's got is 22 times. Yeah,
You got to wonder how that's even allowed.
Well, I think the government did clamp down on it a bit a couple of years ago, but I mean the councils really got into this. Well, and the government was perfectly happy.
That's actually mad.
Yeah, and the government was perfectly happy to do this because what they wanted to do is they wanted to lower the amount they're sending to councils, so they didn't necessarily mind how councils were making up that difference. They were doing it by buying office property, and the idea was, well, of course, that's never going to go wrong, is it? Save as houses, office property, unless you suddenly have a pandemic where everybody learns the virtues of working from home and the value of office property falls, and at the same time, the cost of refinancing your loan goes from 1% to 5%. So, so it is not only a time bomb for the US banking sector, it is also a time bomb for anybody in England who lives within the reach of a council and has to pay council tax. So that's not good. Next tweet is from Jim Bianco looking at this. So the last 2 years of economic woes that we've had have been basically all about the Federal Reserve trying to do something called quantitative tightening, the opposite of quantitative easing, because they've said, the era of loose money has come to an end and we're going to be financially responsible now. So that lasted about 18 months. And in the space of this last couple of weeks, 2/3 of quantitative tightening has been reversed. So that return to normality that they promised was coming, the end of the easy money, that is rowing back. And there's an active debate on financial Twitter at the moment about whether this counts as quantitative easing or not. I'm on the side that says yes, it basically does, because even though they're saying it's temporary, they're not going to be in any better situation in a year. This is going to be a permanent expansion of a bank's balance sheet. So financial prudence is gone out the window. So this is not looking good for Western economies. It's not bad for everybody though, because some people have been isolated from the Western banking system. Let's go to the next tweet. This was if you want to go to the man talking there below. So this chap used to be heavily exposed to the Western financial system, but Biden decided to isolate him from it about a year ago, and he's basically developing alternatives to this at the moment. And he gives a very interesting speech there, basically explaining how the Western system has gone and shot itself in the foot, because really the biggest power of the US was never really its military. It was its dollar. The dollar has basically given it a free income. It's given it free energy. It's given a free credit line to it, so it can run up vast amounts of debt while spending huge amounts of money on itself, including its military. The military power follows the economic power, and they've shot themselves in the foot, because they've basically given everybody in the world an incentive to get off the dollar. Now, to give you an example of how precarious this situation is starting to be, even though it's not talked that much about in mainstream circles, it is starting to permeate. So I'm going to show you a clip from a CNN chap. Now, CNN is, of course, it is regime central. So nothing is getting discussed on CNN unless it's already been through the mill in the back rooms at this point. Listen to what the regime is now warming you up for.
Here's my take. The most interesting outcome of the 3-day summit between Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping got limited media attention. Describing their talks, Putin said, "We are in favor of using the Chinese yuan for settlements between Russia and the countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America." So, the world's second largest economy and its largest energy exporter are together actively trying to dent the dollar's dominance as the anchor of the international financial system. Will they succeed? The dollar is America's last surviving superpower.
So that's the start of his segment. He then, of course, because he's on CNN, he has to then go through this long bit about why Biden is absolutely fantastic.
And how
and
Donald
all
Trump
Trump's
is really to blame.
Yeah, exactly. And
like clockwork, isn't it?
Yes, it is utterly unconvincing, the middle part of the segment, so I cut it out. And let's just go to the last bit of it now.
If it is, Americans should worry. I spoke last week about the bad geopolitical habits Washington has developed because of its unrivaled unipolar status. It's even more true economically. America's politicians have gotten very used to spending seemingly without any concern about deficits. public debt in America has risen almost fivefold, from roughly $6.5 trillion 20 years ago to $31.5 trillion today. The Fed has solved a series of financial crises by massively expanding its balance sheet, almost 12-fold, from around $730 billion 20 years ago to about $8.7 trillion today. All of this only works because of the dollar's unique status. If that were to wane, America will face a reckoning like none before.
So you got to think, if that's what the regime is gently warming people up to, how bad are the conversations behind the scene? It can't be good. I thought it was worth touching on this because even though you're being told through mainstream sources at the moment that don't worry about the banking crisis because it's all disappeared, it's all in the background, you don't need to worry about it more. It is very much live. It is brewing under the surface, and just take care with that. Now, one final thought. I don't know if this means anything, entirely speculative, but basically I fed everything that I had into Chat GPT-4 to see if it could predict.
Tell me what the next 10 years of politics is going to be.
Yeah, when the big financial collapse was going to come, and it told me 2033. Okay. So we got a bit of time. It's all gonna grind slow until then. So you stock up on beans and baseball bats before then.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Epochs series, this episode on the Sumerians. And if you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.